Okay, good morning, everyone. We still have a few people trickling in from the waiting room, but I wanted to welcome you to the January luncheon of the St. Louis Metro section of the American Planning Association. Today, we have a great presentation from Ken Stapleton about planning for equity and community safety. And this is worth an equity credit. So I know everyone's going to be excited about that. Before we get started, just a couple of announcements. Please do mute yourself if you have not already. Then also moving on to my other notes. So our February virtual luncheon will be on Wednesday, February 16th. It's going to be about census results. So with 2020 census results gradually being released, some communities have expressed surprise and sometimes disappointment at their decennial census population results. At February's virtual luncheon, we'll hear about why census results matter to you and your community and how to request that the Census Bureau review and reconsider census results. And we will be joined by Scott Hansen on that one, so I'm very much looking forward to it. Also, please save the date for the Missouri State Conference on October 5th, 7th. That will be here in downtown St. Louis at Live by Lowe's. All right, so now for today's presentation, Planning for Community Safety and Equity from Ken Stapleton. With over 30 years of urban revitalization and economic development experience, Ken provides urban economic development program strategy and project management services related to university community partnerships, talent attraction retention strategies, innovative urban safety programs, public health initiatives, urban mobility projects, urban place management, place branding, and urban redevelopment strategies to a variety of public and private clients throughout the United States and Canada. Ken is also the president and CEO of the award-winning SafedesignTM Institute, an organization providing innovative design services, communication strategies, training, program evaluation, and organizational development guidance related to real and perceived safety in urban environments. He speaks regularly at national and international conferences about the topic and has received an APA Award of Excellence using this unique approach. Ken holds a master's degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Illinois and is a full member of the Urban Land Institute. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you, Christy. I appreciate the opportunity today and way to draw a nice crowd. I'm really excited to talk to you all. Special shout out to Katie Shackelford. Katie, I see that you're in the room. Katie made the connection here, and Katie and I are doing some work in St. Louis. So I'm happy to be here and talk to you about probably my most passionate work that I do, which is around safety and how improving real and perceived safety can lift up communities that have seen significant disinvestment. So without further ado, let me jump in, make sure my slides, there we go. So what we want to talk to you about today is real and perceived safety is essential for equity and equitable development and redevelopment and revitalization. I want to just head on, take on this discussion that's been happening lately about crime prevention through environmental design, CPTED, and talk about past use and misuse of CPTED. And then get into this product that we've created, this new kind of plan we've created called a Community Safety Action Plan, what it contains, the kind of impacts we're seeing it have, and the innovative approaches for planners and designers that are part of this overall approach. And we want to leave plenty of time today for robust Q&A. Christy told you a lot about me. It's all here on the slide, but there are a couple things I want to make sure that you as planning and design professionals understand about me. I'm a planner by training. I have facilitated planning approvals for millions of square feet of commercial projects and thousands of residential units. I understand how this business works. But I've also done over 150 design reviews for safety, projects, plans, and districts. And so it's a pretty unique perspective on this topic. And then finally, I've had the luck in my career to be a senior executive in redevelopment agencies and nonprofits that are in this space and have the benefit of actually implementing many of these ideas because I could. I had the budgetary discretion to do it. I had the authority to do it. And it allowed me to test and refine a variety of innovative innovative programs and approaches and strategies, including special attention to some strategic communications approaches to impact safety perceptions and how they also impact the equity issues and the prosperity of traditionally disinvested communities. So I'm looking forward to kind of sharing some of this with you today. I tell my colleagues and my consulting partners that if I could do only this work, this kind of safety work for a living, I would drop everything else that I do, including the university partnerships and everything else. It is the thing I'm most passionate about. Before we move further, I would like to ask you, though, to take a minute to log into slido.com, and use the number on your screen, 752-556, to tell me a little bit more about you so that I have a sense of what kinds of work and experiences you've had around this issue of safety. And the idea here is check anything that applies to anything and everything that applies to you. So if it doesn't apply to you, skip it. But if it does apply to you, go ahead and click the box, and we'll see in a couple of minutes, kind of who's in the room.
In the sense that the input makes it.
And I really like how it ranks this. So, the more yeses we get for each one, the higher it ranks on the list here.
People are not made.
By the way, these are all anonymous answers, so don't hesitate to put things in there that you might be worried about. I'm really liking the fact that a lot of you have used some of this work to address walkability in transit. It's one of the key things that we look at. And it looks like a lot of you are actually in the process of doing some of the design reviews. I am surprised at number 5, I will tell you. I talked to a lot of people that aren't particularly happy with the way their police departments apply CPTED and other kinds of design reviews. Excellent. Well, that's very helpful to me. I just scrolled away from the slide, but let me go ahead and move on and talk from my perspective about equity and safety is essential to equity. And the way I'd like to do this is just kind of try and understand, what does equity really look like to people? And so we took some of the work from Invest STL around what equity in a plan looks like. And we pulled 4 of their bullets. There are actually a number of other bullets. We pulled 4 of their bullets that we thought were particularly applicable here. Number 1, to have a plan that really addresses equity, you have to address essentials for well-being, which include safety, obviously. Which is clear and very good. A lot of people don't make the connection between health and safety, though. So essentials for well-being also includes that they have healthy places to live and to exercise. And what we try to help our clients understand is that when people are afraid, that creates mental health issues that are very significant. And those mental health issues often very frequently turn into physical health issues. So the lack of exercise impacts their diabetes, the fact that they're not allowed to go out, or they don't feel safe enough to go out and walk or have their children play outside. very significant issues, and that in that way, the safety and the health are equity issues for neighborhoods that have seen a lot of disinvestment. Invest SDL also says that, you know, equity has to mitigate displacement. And we all know about the gentrification kind of displacement where someone comes in, buys the property, builds something new, and creates something that's not affordable for the people that used to live there. We don't talk a lot about flight when it comes to displacement, what I'll call it indirect displacement or a voluntary displacement. And flight is impacted significantly by people's concerns about crime and safety. We know that the stats are out there, the reports and studies have shown us that independent of race, people who don't feel safe enough won't stay in a neighborhood. So we know that that's impacting equity in some of these neighborhoods. Expanding economic opportunity and mobility requires investment, typically outside investment. And those outside investors always look at safety. They don't necessarily classify it as real or perceived safety. They just know what the reputation for safety is. And it often keeps investors away from these communities and therefore reduces that economic opportunity and mobility that is essential for equity. And then finally, from Invest SDL, advancing resident serving systems. And resident serving systems, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy, they need a roof over their heads, so that's important. But safety and safety from crime, also safety from traffic, and safe walking paths from that standpoint, but primarily safety from crime and harm is one of those resident serving systems that has to be there if we're providing equitable opportunities and equitable neighborhoods and places for people. Beyond what Invest SDL talks about, we like to think about equity in terms of advancing community knowledge and tools. And this is about an empowerment or a capacity building aspect of this. We go into a lot of neighborhoods, Black and brown neighborhoods that are poor, that have had historic disinvestment. They are all concerned about crime. But the only two solutions that they know of are we need more police and we need better lighting. And that's kind of where they stop. Because they don't have other tools, and policing is the most expensive solution, and lighting is a very challenging solution because too many utilities control it. They don't have an equitable chance to really have self-determination and to organize themselves around safety. And so advancing their knowledge is key to building equity for them. We also talk a lot about gender equity, and the truth is, from a safety standpoint, women have distinct, very distinct perspectives on safety. We'll talk about this a little bit later on, something we call a varying safety threshold. And that's why we have the Design Downtown for Women book highlighted there. But it's important that we continue to look at gender inequity in these communities because even in Black and brown communities, men and women experience the community very differently and the opportunities very differently. Property ownership, resident property ownership helps a lot with something that is called territoriality, which is not just real ownership, but a sense of ownership and care and concern that impacts safety. And then finally, building up capacity for collective advocacy and action is super important to building equity in these communities. And what we found is that safety is a great place to start. And so these are some of the ways that we see safety impacting equity as you try to build plans, build equity into plans. Understanding how safety contributes to that is really important. And frankly, we think it's just fundamental to what you're trying to do when you're creating equity in your planning processes and in your planning outcomes. So let me move on to this idea of CPTED uses and abuses. I want to say like 50% of you maybe had some training around this, and I'm going to guess that a lot of it was around CPTED. But the rest of you may not have heard about this. And this is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. That natural surveillance, access management, and territoriality are the key basics of CPTED. And what you see there in terms of the diagram is, somebody trying to make it really complicated for everyone else. And the truth is that natural surveillance is not formal surveillance. Natural surveillance is people noticing what's going on and paying attention to what's going on just by going about their daily lives. Access management does not mean access denial. It just means making it harder for those who would do harm to move about. And territoriality is more than just the absence of disorder. Territoriality is actually the presence of care and concern and visible signs of care and concern. And to really effectively use CPTED, you have to balance all those three, because sometimes they will conflict with each other. And people don't always necessarily, they'll try to do access management and ignore natural surveillance and territoriality, and it just doesn't work. We don't have time to do a full thing on CPTED today, but I wanted to just kind of go over those basics with you before we move into uses and abuses. So part of the reason we're talking about this today is there's been some chatter and some real heavy criticism of CPTED over the last couple of years. And those of us who work in this space have been paying attention to it. And I want to address that. Primarily what I want to say is that there are great examples of people using CPTED out there to have positive impacts without negative impacts, because they're using it the right way. They know how to use it. They're using those fundamental principles in good ways. I have done work that has been completely positive in South Beach. If you know the Healthline BRT in Cleveland, which is the picture there, it is absolutely a great example of well-applied CPTED without any negative consequence whatsoever. The first project I did was a small park in downtown Hollywood that completely transformed the park and a street, just using fundamental principles, again, without any punitive kind of aspects to it. But if you've paid attention to the DC Metro system and how it developed and how CPTED was used in it, you know that that's another great example of it. And the Atlanta school system has been doing some really phenomenal work in the last 10 years under the guidance of a planner / cop team who happen to be married, the Carters. And so there are great examples of this out there in use. But the truth is they're kind of not the norm. They have a tendency to be exceptions to what we see most of the time. And what we see most of the time, and we've been in many communities and taken a look at how they're using CPTED, is that when the reviews are done for projects or there's a lot of discussion, there's a formal surveillance focus, from the police department using cameras or lines of sight from a police car. There's a target hardening focus, which is all about access denial and not necessarily access management. There's minimal attention to perceptions. And perceptions, as we'll talk about a little bit later, we think lead to reality. There's focuses on asset protection, because typically we see police and security professionals using CPTED. There are punitive features focuses. There's a lot of chatter about signage as territoriality instead of real territoriality. And then we have the police department and security as the primary users. And what we've seen as a result of this is over-policing approaches in poor and minority neighborhoods, where we're putting cameras everywhere, and we cut down all the landscaping so the police can see everything. What we have seen is that target hardening has done major harm to perceptions and reinforced place avoidance in some of these neighborhoods. Most places have failed to understand negative indirect messaging that comes from really awful design. And there have been a lot of punitive actions and features around homelessness and people who find themselves homeless. And so this has all led to some real pushback. And in fact, earlier this year, my colleague and I, John Lusher, did a presentation for the International CPTED Association, and the theme of their annual meeting was Why CPTED? And this was the title of our presentation, Why CPTED Fails. And we don't have time to go through the whole thing. I can send you the link to our presentation if you're that interested in it. But one of our slides was about poor definition issues. And fundamentally, CPTED has been defined so many different ways by so many different people that, and this includes cities, by the way, that people don't really have a firm grasp of what it is or what it can be in a positive way. Anything that's ever happened that's negative about CPTED ends up being communicated and passed on because there's such a poor definition out there that's consistent. And so one of the things that happened was various people, including myself, began to use different terms. If you've seen the book Safescape, if you've heard about safe growth, we use safe design. But the reasons for that is that we can control the message about what we do, and we can make sure that the definitions don't get us in trouble because other people are doing things with these fundamental ideas that aren't really consistent with the way we think about this and the way that we utilize those fundamental principles, not just of CPTED, but even our own principles as we go forward. So these poor definitions have led others to conclude that these ideas are racist and oppressive, no matter how they're used. And that's a challenge for those of us who think they're useful when used appropriately. And so, that's kind of a quick overview. We don't have a lot of time today to talk about the uses and abuses of CPTED, but I did want to take a minute and give anyone that wants to pipe up about this, maybe if you want to share your own CPTED story, either a positive one or a negative one. Any takers? Just unmute yourself and speak up.
Yeah, Ken, this is Katie, but using CPTED when I was in Peoria, we were educating local businesses. Essentially, one of the things that had been a problem was not having good eyes on the street from the local residents. And we noticed that a lot of our businesses had posters and displays that covered their entire window so that there couldn't be visual access in or out. So you could never tell if it was safe inside the building or outside. And so we worked to get those groups to just take down the posters or improve the visual awareness. And that had a positive impact, one on their businesses, and it just made the area appear more safe. Probably one other example I can tell from St. Louis is for a project we're working on right now, there was some feedback from the public that we needed these the blue light safety buttons to go along the corridor so that people would feel safer while they were walking, and use the opportunity to educate people that those really send a message to the general public that this place is not safe and you need a safety call button at all times because we can't guarantee you're safe in this place. So helping people understand the visual cues that they're giving with the tools that they're using was a positive application of CPTED.
Excellent. Yeah, we call that a negative indirect safety message. It's a great example. Anyone have like a horror story you want to share? Or you can tell me later if you want. I have my own. It's been an interesting 30 years of using this. So let's go ahead and move on and talk a little bit. So as we think about plans as planners, right? We have lots of different kinds of plans. We have framework plans, we have comprehensive plans, we have land use plans, we have mobility plans, but there are not too many community safety plans out there from a planning perspective. And as we began to use all these different kinds of techniques and develop them and apply them, what became kind of interesting to us was that there was an opportunity to really go into a community that was having challenges and get after this in a very comprehensive way, right? So this is the way we like to do things as planners. We really want to get in after everything and kind of package it all together. And so we've created this new kind of plan that we call a community safety action plan. We've used this exclusively in Black and brown, minority, low-income communities with major disinvestment issues. The first one of these we did, as Christy mentioned earlier, we actually received an award of excellence from APA for. And so we felt like we had something that made some sense and it could be useful to others. And what I want to do next is just kind of walk you through what those look like and kind of some of the innovative principles that we've been able to use as part of these. So the community safety action plans go beyond CPTED. So we're going to put CPTED in a rearview mirror to a degree and have a variety of innovative concepts and solutions. We've trademarked these as being safe as part of the safe design approach to avoid that misinformation we talked about earlier. I am not getting rich off of a trademarked safe design, but it does allow me to control message around it. We do this at a scale that is different than most people use CPTED and other techniques. We do it at a neighborhood scale, a district scale, or a downtown scale. And we absolutely invite broad stakeholder influence, and that includes people who are already there and people who we want to be there and people who the rest of the community want to be there, but that are not there yet, whether they come as residents or workers or shoppers or participants in cultural activities, whatever that looks like. The plans have special attention to perceptions and the issues of place avoidance. And they primarily focus on non-police strategies and actions. That's one I want to repeat. They focus on non-police strategies and actions. We use different kinds of metrics for perceptions and place avoidance. And they are absolutely full spectrum. We look at land use patterns all the way down to flower colors, in those beds at the end of your, mid-block crossing, right? And you may have seen that in the BRT picture from Cleveland. And all of this is done through a prosperity improvement lens versus a crime reduction lens, which is a little bit different than when you're talking with people about safety in their communities. They want to talk about crime reduction, and we look at it more through prosperity improvement. So just a graphic to kind of help you understand the way we think about what we do. If you think about Jane Jacobs and the Death and Life of Great American Cities, and then Oscar Newman's Defensible Space, C. Ray Jeffrey and Tim Crone's CPTED, and then Kelling's Broken Windows, we kind of try to wrap all those into what we do, but look at it through this prosperity and economic development lens and a planning lens, which is different than most other users of the other techniques that you're talking about, other than eyes on the street, which I have some fun with in some of my presentations. We basically get at this with three buckets of approach, three buckets of activities. One is the physical environment and how that impacts real and perceived safety. The second is programs and some patrols. And by patrols, we typically mean clean and safe programs, but it also means your maintenance staff, if you have any, and a variety of other programs. Often when we do our training around this, one of the questions I ask people is to try and stump me to identify a program that I can't tweak to have better impact on real and perceived safety, and I haven't been stumped yet. And the last thing is, and this is really important, and as planners, we don't always necessarily get into this very much, but it's something we have to be conscious of, which is that communicating about safety, and kind of to Katie's earlier example of the blue lights, when you're communicating about safety, a lot of times we're not really aware of what we're really communicating. We're not aware of indirect messages we're sending, and we're not being very intentional about safety, and particularly safety of place and the perception of safety in a place and the brand of the place when it comes to safety. We often talk about safety in terms of protecting organizations, including police departments, but we don't always talk about safety in terms of protecting and promoting places. So that's why that communications piece is so important. This is a list of the innovative approaches, or some of the innovative approaches that we've developed over the years. We are not going to get to every one of these today because we will run out of time if I try to talk to you about all of these. But I do want to go over a few of them and highlight some of the ways that we get after this in these community safety action plans. The first one is a principle that perception leads to reality. And fundamentally, this can be an upward spiral or downward spiral. We're showing you the downward spiral here. So fear begets place avoidance. And when there are fewer people around, it creates isolation, which impacts place avoidance, and it impacts our fear. Eventually, if you have enough isolation and place avoidance, you get place decay because people don't spend time and money in the place. And that leads to lack of formal or informal, mostly any kind of informal social control, and you end up with more antisocial behavior, which creates more fear, and on the circle goes. If you reverse that, by the way, you end up with an upward spiral, but you have to pay attention to the fear and the perception and what that does to place avoidance. Secondly is something we call varying safety thresholds. And what this means is that safe enough in a given place, pick a corner, safe enough is different for people with different backgrounds. And this varies primarily by gender and by age and by familiarity with a place or similar places, right? And so I came up with this chart a few years back that talked about Rambo not being afraid of anything. Police, their perceptions are very different even than mine. And if you go out to my mom, who has the most spending power to come to your place and spend time and money, it's got to be much safer to get her to spend her time and money there than it does for me. And so as you think about what is safe enough, even when you're thinking about perceptions, it's important to understand that safe enough is going to be different for different kinds of people, different groups of people. It'll be different for residents than it is for visitors because residents are more familiar with a particular place. And so you have to number one, don't ever use your own perception to do an evaluation of a place because it's not likely to be the same as the people you're trying to make that place safe enough for. And number two, when you do evaluations of surveys or even focus groups or things like that, you have to pay a very close attention to the gender and age and familiarity differences. And there are a few other factors that go in there, but those are the main ones. So think about varying safety thresholds. When we talk about transportation and walkability, which are key components to equity, quite honestly, we use something we call a total travel path analysis. And that is fundamentally, what does your travel path look like from your place of safety, which is often your home, to your destination and back again. And this is an example of a typical, if you will, winter use of transit. If I'm going from home and then going to work, let's say in a downtown, and then coming back home again, this time of year, in January, in December. And you will see that a lot of it is after dark. And if we don't pay attention to that full travel path, if at any point along that travel path, I don't feel safe enough, let's say my mom doesn't feel safe enough, right? Then I'm not going to take transit. I'm going to get in my car. And I'm not going to walk past the shops that you want me to spend money at. I'm not going to support the transit system because I'm not going to be a rider. And so thinking about that full pathway, and this isn't just for transit, it's if you want people to come and visit a group of businesses or a business district, if there's a historical negative perception, you have to pay attention to the pathway that they're going to take to get to that destination and then back out again. A lot of times we don't think about back out again because, and that's important because a lot of times that back out again is after dark and things change. Perceptions change after dark. I didn't put that in there, but it's kind of obvious. The next thing that we talk a lot about is paying attention to what's been called the she economy. And that upper left note is what you really need to pay attention to, which is 85% of all brand purchases are made by women. And in the fine print, if you can read that, 91% of new homes. And why we emphasize this and why you saw the picture of the book earlier is that all these purchase decisions are preceded by a place decision. So where I'm going to buy a home is the first question I'm going to ask myself before I actually look at all the other stuff that comes with buying a home. Where I'm going to go buy clothing for my children happens before I decide whether or not it's Izod or an off-brand, right? And women are making most of those decisions, and their safe enough safety threshold is different than men. And most of our built environments, unfortunately, historically are, really governed and designed and built and managed by men. And so there's a big disconnect there that we'd like to talk to people about. And that's one of the key things that we like to put out there for people. I'm going to take a pause here and just ask you to jump back onto Slido real quickly and just note in a word or two which of these concepts that you find most interesting or useful. By the way, I hate doing this by Zoom and Slido. I'd rather have a conversation in the room, but this is where we are these days, guys. While people are logging on, anyone have any questions about the ones that I've described so far? Feel free to throw some things in the chat too if you care to. Okay. While people are talking, I will just tell you kind of an interesting factoid about the pathway safety audits. We do those exclusively with women. We do those exclusively after dark. And it makes our clients incredibly nervous to do those things, but they bring us some of the best insights that we find when we're out in particular places.
Hey, Ken, just wanted to chime in. It looks like there's a question in the chat box.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. So the question is about perceptions of safety in parking lots and garages, and which do people perceive as safer? I'll say it this way. Some parking garages are fantastic and would be rated higher than parking lots. But on balance, most people don't like parking garages because they feel very isolated. There's some lots that are the same, but lots are often perceived as safer, partly because we are so bad at building garages. One of my projects right now is actually looking at a major parking facility up in Minneapolis and trying to undo some of the challenges that have come about with regard to safety perceptions. They've actually fixed a lot of their safety issues, but they still have lingering perceptions. And I will tell you that my favorite kind of parking garage when it comes to safety is an automated garage. And I will shut up about that because I will take 10 minutes to talk about it if I don't. So Sheconomy seems to be a pretty kind of coming up as our primary thing of interest. And I'm glad to hear that because it is something that will serve you well if you pay attention to it. Well, so let me go ahead and move on. Thank you for that feedback. That was actually really interesting to me. And talk about, what the Community Safety Action Plan looks like and some of the kinds of recommendations that we often put in them. So the plan itself, you start out with an assessment of community concerns. We do look at crime patterns. We look at perceptions information if it exists. Often it does not. But we also look at past plans and policies, as well as placemaking systems. And placemaking systems can be anything from park design and management to public art to crosswalks. So there's a lot of different things that are part of that system. We do site assessments both during the day and at night. We often find that others do not do site assessments at night, which when you're dealing with safety is just really silly. So we do that, and we often do those assessments both during the week and then again on the weekends because there are some significant differences there. Then we come up with program recommendations, the built environment strategies, and strategic communications issues, but we always bring to the table new success metrics. And we try to move people away from focusing exclusively on crime statistics or even incident reports or things like that when it comes to safety. And we move them over more to activity and perceptions and look at that. Our technical reports are usually in an appendix, and they can cover anything from lighting. So really deep dive into lighting and lighting design requirements and even processes for reviewing lighting plans, to total travel path reports. We often take a hard look at design guidelines. And we, as part of the plans, we usually pick one or two specific projects that we will do a deep dive project review as part of it's kind of part of education and training deal. And then other priority items we might do a technical report on. We always make training recommendations because people need to understand the fundamentals of this to be able to ask good questions after we leave. And so that's often part of not just the plan, but frankly, it's often part of our proposals and our process. And then there's a series of action items for planning, and those assignments are for the planners, the engineers, the public space managers, the communications team, the people who manage the grant facade programs and the economic development incentives. And typically there's not a lot that we have in these plans that says the police should do X, Y, or Z. We often do have detailed recommendations around clean and safe programs though. And some sample example strategies require better territoriality lighting and natural surveillance for financial or other incentives. So if we've bought property and we're putting it in a deal, you have to do special things around safety. If you're getting a grant from us, you have to do special things around safety. Paying close attention to exit wayfinding focused on after dark conditions. So how do I make it back home safely is really important. We talk a lot about dog parks because they enhance informal social interaction. That's one we didn't talk a lot about, but it's basically people getting to know each other, which is really important. Dogs are the new kids. Not just using public art, but using lighted public art to help enhance territoriality at night and wayfinding. Adjusting design guidelines, where design guidelines are almost always lacking in intentional kinds of guidelines around real and perceived safety. And using team design reviews with the police department and trained residents. So it's not just a planner doing a design review for safety. It's not just a police officer doing a design review for safety, but it's a team doing it. And that's really important to do because you teach each other things and you get better and better at it. And then there's typically we have a lot of focus on the communication side on how you include positive indirect safety messages in your communication. So you never use the word safe, but you use pictures of women and families pushing strollers around your neighborhood is one of the kind of simple examples of that. And then the walking safety audits after dark, which a couple of you mentioned as things that you thought were interesting. And again, we use that as part of the process, but we also use it as a recommendation in the plans about things that our clients need to do even after we leave. So we took some time in the last week or so because I knew I was going to do this presentation to reach out to some of our clients and get some feedback because we hadn't talked to them a few years because we've all been sitting in our home offices because of COVID. Interesting, we heard back from them. Our plans have typically at least 200 action items in them. And part of what we heard was, that's too many, we don't know where to start. So we're seeing limited implementation about this comprehensive approach, but they are working on them. One of the really interesting things, and probably one of the best indicators for us, is that our clients are telling us that they're putting the safety lens on everything and they're putting it on early. So as they think about that next housing project, they're thinking about safety before they even start to do conceptual design, long before they get into design development. When they think about their parks, they're thinking about safety early on. When they think about their programming and what they're doing for youth in the community, they're thinking about safety. So that's really important. They're also looking at how this plan is helping them with their equity. And part of the way it's helping them is that the safety initiatives in the plan have allowed them to create better feedback loops beyond safety, which is really, really a positive thing. And we've said this for years. It was great to hear my clients say it. In one instance, they had major water quality issues in a neighborhood. And as part of the conversations they were having around safety, this came up and they were able to uncover the need to really do some great things around that. Our clients are telling us they're getting much better social cohesion. People were coming out around there was, in one instance, we helped them with the design of a community garden to make sure that it integrated safety and a lot of informal social interaction. And so that's creating social cohesion. We're seeing collective action come out of a lot of those different things. And they're looking at placemaking as crime prevention. And what that's helping them do is when they're out there talking to people about the placemaking, there are a lot of people that see placemaking as something that's kind of an add-on or not really that important. It's just kind of an extra. And so it's not as important as, the drainage pipe underneath the road. Well, by being able to position the placemaking as crime prevention, and this happened in Minneapolis, by the way, they've been able to attract new funding to do those things that we all know contribute to quality of life as well. And so the fact that you can really describe the placemaking and some of the other things that we know as planners are great things to do for neighborhoods as contributing to improving safety actually bumps them up a couple of notches on the priority list when it comes to funding and support. And that's a really important aspect of these plans, because part of what we're hearing is that the staff of these organizations are empowered to push back when people were trying to push their projects back down that priority list. They're saying, no, this is about safety, and it's allowing them to additional leverage to get things done. They are definitely resulting in enhanced partnerships with police and others, including institutions and businesses. And they have seen new champions emerge, both from the business community, but the elected officials and some of the institutions that they work with. So we're running a little bit out of time. And so I want to wrap this up just by saying, if you really are interested in this and you want to get going on it, there are just 5 basic steps that we would say that you need to kind of get after right away. Number 1, embrace it. Embrace being part of a new kind of solution. This is not what we were trained to do in school, at least not what I was trained to do in school. You have to basically say, you know what, we want to play in this game and we want to be serious about it. The second thing you want to do is just get a good set of basic training for a team of partners, internal and external, so that everybody starts from the same page and you begin to build relationships and conversations, because this is an integrated approach. It takes everybody. You definitely need to find champions, because otherwise you won't have a long-lasting impact. But politicians and elected officials and others, unfortunately, safety has become a major issue for many cities again. And that means you have an opportunity to say, listen, we want to get after this a different way. And there's a lot of people who are looking for ways other than policing or over-policing to get after this. So it's a good time to be looking for those champions. You likely will need a coach or a consultant unless you've done this quite a bit already. And the last thing I'll say as you think about getting started is, don't try and do it over a big area. Pick something small, get after it, show that it works in a place that's a fairly small place, and then take that and repeat it in a bunch of different places. And with that, I talk too long, as I usually do, but I'll shut up and welcome challenges and questions.
Thank you so much, Ken. You did not talk too long. You talked a great amount of time. So now we have plenty of time left for questions and answers. Feel free to put those in the chat box, or if you want to unmute yourself and jump on in. Real quickly, I want to point out that we are recording this and it will be posted to the section's website and YouTube channel. So now go ahead and hit us with your questions. Let's see. Looks like we have one in the chat.
Okay,
all right.
You want me to read these, or why don't you MC this?
Okay,
Kristen?
I can MC it for you.
That way I don't have to try and read.
Sure. So from Kalina, she says, civil engineer here working on a roundabout through a college campus. The city wants lots of trees incorporated. Campus security doesn't want any trees. Any suggestions for helping these parties negotiate or resources to point them towards?
So again, campus security wants 100% sight lines on everything, and they're not necessarily going to understand that the trees can help create a point of interest, that the trees can create a wayfinding device. A lot of times what happens is that if we don't coordinate our lighting, then the trees actually create shadowy places, which are negative, and we need to avoid them. And so the campuses are very unique places. I have a lot of experience on campuses, so I'm trying to think this one through. Fundamentally, you need someone in your facilities group to push back on campus, to push back on the campus security. If they don't have much background in this, that may be difficult for you. But I don't know, it may be a longer conversation. Maybe we can do that one offline. I may need to think about that one. That's pretty specific. Sorry if that wasn't a very good answer.
All right. The next one, how can we do nighttime walk audits if we as professionals don't feel comfortable walking these places at night?
Take a cop with you. I mean, that's what we do. You know, and you can control it. So believe it or not, this time of year is actually a good time to do these because it gets dark early. So you're less isolated when you're out there, you know, at like 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. But yeah, we've had clients actually require that we have a police escort. It's kind of a little counterproductive because people don't feel like they typically would feel if they've got a police escort. But it's still useful to do. And what we do is we instruct the police to just kind of hang back and be around so that the other people in the neighborhood or the district see them, but that, you know, they're not front and center in terms of our participants.
In talking with those that said they haven't implemented much, did they say what things they have been implementing? Is there a pattern to what they have started with first?
The clean and safe kinds of programs are very popular now. And so we do have clients that spend a lot of their time and energy around those. And what we've tried to do with them is to help them understand kind of how to maximize their impacts around that. And people always pay attention to lighting, although they aren't necessarily very good at it, even though we try to train them around that. And then the last thing is every one of our clients has gotten into public art. What you see behind me was one of our recommendations for one of our clients in an area that had a horrible reputation. They've since done 2 more of their, these are what water towers look like in South Florida, by the way, for those of you who don't recognize them. And so public art has become a really interesting, popular way that people begin to impact perceptions, particularly if you light that public art and it's in key locations that begin to send a message of care and concern. It's a huge territoriality kind of play that pretty much all of our clients have done.
Okay, our next question. We are starting to go into final design for a central plaza in the center of our uptown area. What resources or books would you recommend for guidance as our plan moves forward?
I would start with the Design Downtown for Women book, and understand that, you know, women's use of public spaces is very different, and so you'll find not just discussions of safety in there. You'll find about kind of specific ways to make women more comfortable in public spaces. I've got a long chapter in that book that will kind of help you. It kind of articulates a lot of this better and much more fully. That's a great one to look at. What else would I say? I don't know. That's a great question. I'm not sure I have a great answer for that. I don't know that there is a fantastic book out there right now that helps with this. I mean, SafeScape was very thorough, but very detailed and kind of challenging, and it doesn't focus as much intentionally on perceptions as I would like for it to. But, you know, just any, you know, if you look at the Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design book by Tim Crow, that'll give you the basics. The whole idea of this, folks, is to look at things through a different lens and to begin understanding what natural surveillance really means and what territoriality really looks like and what access management really looks like. When you get into the details, they really matter. And you have to think about you know, how people are going to use seeding and how those trees either impede or help, right? And, you know, think about what that place is going to look like after dark or at 6:30 tonight when it's really, maybe if anyone's actually in their offices, people are leaving their offices at 6:30 or whatever else it is, and it's already dark. So again, not a great answer. There's no one great book to look at this point in time. Hopefully that helps. Not sure it did.
They said thank you so in the
Okay.
chat, so good. All right, next question. Does season play a part in safety perception?
Season can for a couple different reasons. Number one, if you have tree light conflicts and you're dealing with deciduous trees, then those conflicts get minimized when it's darkest earliest. So that's interesting. We always recommend to actually avoid the conflicts in the first place. The second thing is that one of the things that is a great sign of territoriality are colorful flowers. We use that technique a lot, and those are hard to maintain in the wintertime and in harsh environments, and so that's a problem. The third thing is just the amount of daylight is really important to pay attention to. When we train around this, we actually show people daylight charts. If you've ever seen a daylight chart, I didn't put one in today, to help remind them that during the summer, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, during the summer, we have long days, right? And so our activities are in the daylight primarily. And so there are fewer concerns when we're most likely to be out and about in public spaces. But as we get into the fall and winter, in those shorter days, then yes, there's a seasonal issue because things get dark. Parking lots get dark, parking garages get darker. Our pathways, our transit stops are dark often. Transit stations and the pathways to and from them are sometimes dark at times when we need to be out and commuting. And so, yes, there is a huge seasonality. All
right, next up, Jane Jacobs talks about how sidewalks are good places for kids to play, but we always hear that cities in general are unsafe or unfriendly places. Do you have any ideas on how to address this, both the real and perceived safety issues?
In most places, how can I say this? Hang on. So probably what's most important there, my parents grew up as city kids. They played on the sidewalks, they played on the streets. We grew up in the suburbs and there were no sidewalks. So we played in the streets. The real issue here is, I mean, sidewalks are a phenomenal place as long as parents feel like their children are safe out there, and parents feel like their children are safe if they can see them and hear them. And so the design of the housing is important. Older neighborhoods have a tendency to have front porches, for example, right? Parents and grandparents spend time out on those porches and they create natural surveillance. Children playing on the sidewalk actually improves safety perceptions. Actually creating places for young children to play is a technique we use to improve safety perceptions. I talked about Anniversary Park earlier as one of the positive things. It was a drug and alcohol park, and we put in play equipment for the youngest of children, and people thought we were crazy, and it worked like 110%. So how do you do that in terms of the sidewalks? My wife and I own a home in Cincinnati that has a great front porch and a great sidewalk and a front fence that's a wrought iron fence. And we put chalk out on the sidewalk so the kids, the neighborhood kids, can use it and play. It's something that can be very positive, but if you've got drug deals going on down the street, you're not going to let your kids play. And so you do have to deal with anything that's real, and you have to have comfortable ways for parents to monitor their kids when they're playing outside like that.
Okay. How do you feel about murals, Ken?
I love murals. I love murals. They are one of those public art things that help do two things. Well done. They create great territoriality. They are phenomenal wayfinding devices. And if you light them at night, they're even more effective. So, I wouldn't say that you're going to put murals everywhere. They can be particularly helpful where you've seen some bad behaviors or where you need better wayfinding. But we've seen them used, for example, in the stairwells of parking garages where they were having problems. And we thought it was a phenomenal, it wasn't our recommendation, it was just a phenomenal thing that somebody came up with in West Palm Beach. Great territoriality.
Yeah. All right. So I don't have in the chat. If anyone has last minute questions, feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt me or throw that in the chat right now. I'll just give a couple last minute announcements, reminders, reiterations that our next luncheon will be on February 16th, talking about census results. Save the date for the state conference in October, the October 5th through 7th, downtown St. Louis. And I think that's everything. This is being recorded and will be posted to the section's website. And if you have any questions about that, you can always shoot me an email. My contact information is on our website. All right, I think that's everything for today. Ken, thank you so much for your presentation. We really enjoyed having you here today.
Thank you. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, if you have questions, the email is kenstapleton.associates@gmail.com. Kalina, if you want to catch up later, you can either email me and we'll find a time to talk through kind of your college issue. That's a complex one that I'd love to talk to you about.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks again for the opportunity. Great to talk to everybody.